You're listening to The Brian and Gina Show, the official podcast of LA Magazine. Here are your hosts, Brian and Gina.
Hello, welcome to the Brian and Gina Show, the official podcast of Los Angeles Magazine. I am Brian Bishop.
Which makes me Gina Grad.
And we are here for a momentous occasion.
Oh.
Our first, I realized this, our first show that we have done in person.
Yeah.
Hello, Gina. How are
Hi.
you? Good to see you.
You're looking well.
Good to actually see you.
Yeah, you too. I have a feeling we'll have the normal warmth and chemistry that comes with the show, which is
it's baked
icy.
in. It's baked into the price.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. We are on location.
We are.
Remote in an incredible office with really good lighting.
Kind of are, actually.
Yeah. Well, for you, it was a schlep from the valley.
Yeah, for me, it was fantastic. I was here in 12 minutes.
Yeah, this is a beautiful office, LA Golf, and we have a very, very special guest.
Indeed, we do. Let's welcome in the studio, which is his office. So let's welcome ourselves into his studio. I almost said the wrong thing. Reed Dickens, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us and being a part of our show.
I should be welcoming you.
You really should.
Yeah.
And where is our welcome?
Welcome to the studio.
Thank you. So there is a sort of a fun intersection with us right now because Los Angeles Magazine's July issue, which is actually out now on stands, focuses on the biggest names in LA sports. And oh, nothing, Reed, you made not just any list, but the list. You are the innovator for the issue, which is incredible because, of course, one of the biggest innovators in golf and LA sports right now. And you're going to explain all of that to us laymen.
You narrowly beat out Gina Grad.
Narrowly.
As the innovator in LA sports.
I just saw a golf course 2 weeks ago. So try to know more than me.
Nice.
But yeah, you're a really fascinating guy, and golf is just the tip of the iceberg. So hopefully we can get into all kinds of stuff.
You know, it's funny. My favorite Dave Chappelle quote, he talks about how when people use words like fascinating or interesting, he always says, well, I have what's called expensive knowledge. It's knowledge from a journey I wouldn't wish on anyone.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's good.
A lot of times you acquire knowledge on a journey, you're like, that wasn't fun.
Yeah. Better you than us.
Yeah. Not recommended path.
Well, you seem like you've landed at a pretty good spot. Yeah.
Happy to be. It's where I always wanted to be. I used to watch Saved by the Bell and wonder how they got to LA. And a lot of people love to shit on LA for traffic or taxes.
Sure.
And I'm always like, yeah, you shouldn't come.
Yep.
That's what I
It's
tell
not
you.
for you.
It's not for you.
Self-selecting.
You
Don't
wanted
come.
that Zach Morris cell phone, the brick phone.
Yeah, you wanted to go to
I'll do
Bayside
anything
High.
to get there.
I give him a lot of credit. He's now, Mark Paul's a good friend of mine. I actually met him.
Of course he is.
I met him on a flight out here.
Sure.
Serendipitously. You can't make it up. And I feel like that's how powerful visualizations are, right? And
you manifested him on your flight.
But I truly love LA. I really do. It's where I always wanted to live. And every time people say, couldn't you build equipment in wherever?
Yeah.
And I'm always like, sure, you could.
But that's not the quality of life I'm
But he named the company LA Golf.
I just don't think Nevada Golf has the same ring.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that or Louisiana are your only choices for LA Golf.
Golf.
Exactly. So go ahead.
I was going to say, speaking of, where did you come from? Where do you come to us from?
So I grew up in Monroe, Louisiana.
Oh, you really are from Louisiana?
Yeah.
Oh, I was joking.
So I didn't, that was a little secret shout out to Louisiana. I didn't put the dots in there. There was actually a lot that went in. I get asked about it a lot. There was a lot that went into the name because one, I'm a huge believer that unaided name recognition, unaided visual recognition costs billions. There's only two levers, time and money. It takes decades or billions of dollars. And I always say there's no hacks. And I actually feel like I found a hack. If you choose two words that have billions of dollars of name recognition built in, not to mention that in Asia, people love LA and they love golf and there's just a lot of benefits.
Sure.
But also I'm from Louisiana. And so I didn't put the dots. Also, you can't legally protect LA, but you can say protect log off. Right.
Oh,
so there was a lot that went into the name. I think it's actually probably one of the best business decisions I've ever made in my career, and probably the most valuable asset I own is just the name. It costs $10 on GoDaddy.
That's amazing.
That is something to be said when you say it's one of your best career decisions, because you've been around the block for someone who looks 28.
I think I can say it's the best because it was the culmination of a lot of lessons learned.
Sure. And you have no accent. Did you ever have an accent?
Of course, and I still do when I'm tired.
When you're tired or had a couple of dips.
Yeah, I think. But in all seriousness, when I became a spokesman, a White House spokesman at a very young age, and was doing television, and the people would make me watch my interviews. As you know, there's nothing worse than the sound of your own voice.
You don't want to roll that game film.
There's nothing worse than the sound of your own voice. And I'd have to go watch listen to my radio interviews, watch my TV news every morning.
Buddy, I get
and
it.
I think what I learned is that the Louisiana accent is not so much an accent as not knowing how to spell and slurring all your words together. And I'm actually only half kidding. I noticed over the years, there's probably 50 words that I was pronouncing wrong because I never knew how to spell them. I grew up pre-internet and pre-spell check. And when everyone pronounces a word wrong, you tend to spell it wrong.
Sure.
And sometimes you spell it wrong because you pronounce it wrong.
Sure.
And I really mean it. So over the years, as I learned how to spell and read and write, and as I learned and had to listen to myself on thousands of interviews, I think you just started enunciating your words. I never woke up and said, I'm hiring what is it called? An accent coach in Hollywood. Yeah, I'm not hiring a coach and getting rid of my accent. I think when you hear yourself talk, you start enunciating your words.
You start self-correcting. Yeah. But I bet you knew how to spell etouffee before the rest of us.
That's a good point.
I still struggle with that. But
okay.
No, but I still talk too fast and tend to slur my words, but really that's the real
Join
answer.
the club, buddy. Yeah. We're all
that's it's kind of a joke, but not really a joke.
No, not at all. And also I like the LA Golf having the double, maybe even triple entendre of LA, Louisiana. I mean, It's got a nice maybe a little history streak in there for people to know.
Correct.
If you know, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
exactly. And now we kind of teased it that we're in LA Golf's office and there's all this great golf equipment and I got to know what's the secret, but I would love to push pause on that and kind of start from the beginning, because again, you're not just somebody who, like they say, fell asleep on third and thinks they hit a triple. Right. So we would love to just get to know you and figure out how we got to where we are now.
Yeah, it's funny. I'd never really told my personal story until about 6 months ago. A friend of mine, Tim Smith, got me to sit down and tell my personal story on his podcast. And he's a good friend of mine in Newport Beach, but it got me to really rethink the whole journey. Not rethink it as much as,
think about
contemplate it.
Right,
yeah.
Sure.
And obviously you get a lot of clarity from hindsight. But I grew up in a very small town. I really do think, I guess you could say it was intuitive, I think curiosity, people always use the word ambition.
Yeah.
I think the root is more curiosity. I used to watch every car that drove by, every plane that went overhead and be like, where are they going? Where the hell is that plane going? Where are they going? It actually drove me crazy. Right. And none of my friends or family really had that.
That wanderlust.
No one did, but I didn't know anyone that had that as strongly as I did. My wife jokes sometimes that I was like the Eminem of Louisiana. I was like angry. We mowed. All my friends would be playing, video games or wiffle ball, and I would be mowing lawns with my dad, in the 100-degree heat. And I would talk to myself, visualize myself giving speeches to large crowds, being in the back of a limousine, and I would start crying. And I was like this, I had this angry engine inside me that was like, how do I get out of here, right? And I honestly watched Saved by the Bell every day. Then Beverly Hills 90210 came out, and I was just obsessed with playing on a bigger stage. And I didn't even know what that looked like. I didn't know what that was going to be.
Yeah. But the drive never left.
Yeah. And so what happened was I went and took a visit. I visited Air Force Academy with some friends. A friend of mine was graduating and I saw Bill Clinton's helicopter landing. And this was really I guess after Saved by the Bell, second visualization that changed my life, right? More of almost a manifestation is that I said to my friend, I'm going to do that one day. And he said, do what? I said, I'm going to work for a president. I could see him yelling at all these young guys who went on to be people I knew, George Stephanopoulos, Doug Band, all these guys. And he was yelling at them and they're on 2 cell phones and they just looked like they were doing something meaningful. Right.
Wow.
And I was looking over the top of the stadium and I said, I'm going to do that. And I think one of the most powerful things that has happened in my life that is just evidence of that kind of how powerful visuals are is that I don't know if it's 7 years later, 6, 7, 8 years later, I should probably go back and check. I landed in the same parking lot in the same helicopter with the next president. Right. And I didn't know one soul in politics. I didn't know how to get into politics. I didn't know anything about politics. I probably couldn't have told you what a Republican or Democrat was. And now full circle, now they don't mean anything. Right. So, but I landed in the same parking lot on that same helicopter with the next president. And I just think that's a powerful,
that gave me chills. And also it's so interesting that you were never, you didn't consume politics like it was like air. That wasn't it.
No,
it was something else.
I always say no. I knew nothing about politics. In fact, I remember working in the West Wing or on the Bush campaign in Austin, Texas, not even Googling. I don't know if there was Google, like looking up when was Richard Nixon. I didn't know if it was Abraham Lincoln, Richard Nixon. I didn't know. I mean, my friends, everyone I interned with went to Yale, Harvard. Their parents knew George W. Bush. They were all donors' kids, and they had this vocabulary and this knowledge of politics, and I knew nothing. So I printed out every speech on the website. I printed out every policy on the website, took them home, read them all. Then when I got to the West Wing, I actually got the president's assistant to start sneaking me his his binder, and I read his entire briefing book every night. So I'd work a 14-hour day, then lock myself in my office and read I read everything he read, basically. Not everything, but
feels like a security violation.
Yeah, a little bit redacted would be good. Yeah, cut that out.
It's funny. And so I actually, what's crazy is I actually did have all the clearances. That shows you how poor, but that's one thing with all the Donald Trump, classified
in the bathroom
bullshit is that I learned just that how I had all the clearances, right? Because I had to carry his binder or his briefing book a lot. And so I had to, and I sat in the meetings a lot, and I was around the intelligence briefing. So I was a junior schmuck. I was not important. President Bush always called us a level 5. He'd always go, I'm level 1, you're level 5.
Sure.
That's good.
This is a level 1 conversation.
Keep you in your place.
Right? He would always remind us, this is a level 1 conversation. Why are you talking? And when people talk about mistakes you made in your career, to this day, I still say, I look back at my time in the White House. When I look at pictures, that's like I think the morning after 9/11. When I look at these photos, I'm always dumbfounded that I talked.
Yeah, you breathe the same air.
Who lets a 25-year-old in the Oval Office, right? Like, that's not my fault. I didn't do that. But then the fact that I was in there, why was I speaking, right? Like I don't even like 25-year-olds talking around me. And I sell putters to rich guys, and I don't even like 25-year-olds talking in my meetings. Right?
I really want to back up and get back and explore this, but I do have to ask while we're on the topic, was there ever a point where the shine, so to speak, came off of George W. Bush and you saw him as a guy as opposed to the president or
the leader of the free world?
I actually think that was the hardest part of not being a fully baked human. Like, guys aren't fully baked till like 40, right? And so
agreed.
I actually, in all seriousness, think that was the most challenging part, is that that is the contrast of my 5 years, right? On the ranch, he was joking, burping, sweating, talking, who's dating who's sleep, whatever. And then the next morning you're in the Oval Office and I'd crack a joke and he would look at me like, why are you here? Right? And it was, I didn't do well. Right? It was probably a lack of emotional intelligence at 25 or 24, 26. And that actually was the challenge I don't think I ever really conquered, is that he was, he was so fun, and he was the Will Ferrell. He was a Will Ferrell character. That's right. At the ranch. Then in the Oval Office, he was a guy who probably knew more about the presidency. He probably understood the office of the presidency better than anyone who'd ever walked. Not just son of the president, legacy. Right? Ambassador to China, CIA director, VP for 8 years during the Cold War, president for 4 years, governor of Texas. No one understood the executive branch he was actually a student of the office of the presidency. Forget politics. And so in the Oval Office, he had this big picture, long-term perspective. If he didn't care if his approval was 21, he didn't care if you think there wasn't WMD. He had this thick skin and this far-sighted perspective. Wow. And he had this real appreciation of the office of the presidency. He would one time we were leaving to play golf, he took off his golf clothes, put on khakis, a dress shirt, and a tie and a sport coat to walk to his office in his house to get his briefing. He forgot his briefing binder, and he wouldn't go in the Oval Office without his jacket and tie on. And so he had this reverence for the presidency. Then we get to the ranch, and he's burping, telling jokes, and so it was actually it was actually challenging that I don't think I did a good job of striking that balance.
That makes sense. And you're a kid, so you think, he's accepting me. He's always accepting me. Now, I would hope there's a part 2 if you've read all the classified stuff. I now want to just do an Area 51 podcast with you, but we'll do that later. So we still have this missing piece of how did you get in that office?
From helicopter to helicopter.
Like you said, your family wasn't connected. What do you have to do with this?
Yeah, and this is the part I've only recently spoken about, because it's such a, if I tell all the sequence of events of things that happen, it honestly sounds like bullshit, right? It's just but there's so many things that happen.
Lined up.
So my wife always jokes that I actually discount most of my stories by 50% just so I won't sound like I'm exaggerating. Right. If I told the real story, it sounds like a bad Disney movie. In fact, one of the things that happened, just to give you an example, to go right to your question, to give you the background, I was walking down the hall and I see a picture of some interns with a congressman on the wall. I stuck my head in the political science professor's office, this grumpy old dude, Dr. William Peterson. I will always owe him. I love to mention people's names when I tell my story, because they were key moments of how I got where I went, right? And I said, how do I become an intern? He said, you can't. And I said, well, why not? And he goes, it's just for donors' kids. And I didn't realize how true that was, right? And I said, well, what if I wanted to? He's like, you can't. He was like, there's not going. And I just wouldn't let up. And I said, well, so I started calling my congressman's office every single day, like a stalker. And then he wrote them a letter. And they finally called me back and said, you can come up from August 1st to August 14th. Anyone who knows anything about Capitol Hill, which by the way, I didn't know Capitol Hill wasn't in the White House, right? I knew nothing, right? And
the most important 2 weeks of the year, August 1st, August 14th.
Congress is in recess, right? Congress is in recess in August. The Congress was not there in August.
Oh my God.
And I was basically but I didn't know any of that, right? And so I went to the grocery store and I bought American flag stationery and I typed on a typing machine, not a computer.
Wow. And
it said, dear family and friends, the United States Congress has chosen me to come to Washington, D.C. and I need your help. And I raised $3,500. The largest check was probably $50. And my Aunt Marianne bought my flight for $200. I bought a suit, 4 ties, a pair of shoes, a plane ticket, and I had enough money to stay in like a GW dorm. And
you're the original crowdfunder.
I got there, and the first day I was there, I see Bill Clinton's motorcade pass by. And I was just like, so I went to the Memorial Day event. I saw Bill Clinton speak and I was just mesmerized, right?
This is Wiley's president. Obviously.
Yeah. And so this is 98, 99 somewhere. And so what's funny is this one lady that I pulled she was the only person, I don't know if you guys know this, but no one's working on Capitol Hill, right?
Okay.
So number one, 27 to 29-year-olds write all policies and do everything.
That's terrifying.
It's terrifying. They've never had a real job, never lived in the real world. Right?
Hate that.
And like I always said, the best and the brightest don't finish business school and go, I'm going to Capitol Hill. It's not the best and the brightest, right? The best and the brightest don't go into politics. That's just a fact. People get offended when I say that. It's the dregs of the professional gene pool, right?
This is what we're here for.
And so it's a fact. And so this one lady was working her ass off and everybody else is playing fantasy football and Nerf basketball. And I went and sat next to her. Long story short, I'm not making it short, but she sent out an all inbox email like a year later. George W. Bush, I'm going to work for George W. Bush in Austin. He's looking for policy advisors. And I literally thought, that's me. Policy advisor.
Policy advisors.
I'm an average student at LSU in Shreveport, not even the real LSU, with no policy background. I'm like, here I am. She never responded. So finally I tried a dating tactic and said, hey, I'm going to actually be in Austin and I'm going to come volunteer for the Bush campaign, which I had no idea. And she said she sent something very important. She responded and said, come say hi. That response I printed out, pretended I had an appointment. The security guard was like, you don't have an appointment. I was like, that's your problem.
Here it is.
And so I kind of talked my way in with that email.
Oh my God.
And here's the part. These are the parts of the story that sound made up. I'm staying there and the lady, I said, I'm here. I'm an intern for Sally Kenfield. And she goes, Sally Kenfield's my roommate. She doesn't have an intern. And my whole body went cold. I'm like, the gig's up. Like here I go from being Frank Abagnale to Exposed.
Just going to say that.
But I'm like, I think I'm Frank Abagnale 1 second and 30 seconds in, I'm Exposed. Over. And she goes, yeah, Sally Kenfield's my roommate. She didn't have an intern. And I stood there frozen.
Well, you know now.
And Sally walked through the lobby and said, read. And I could tell she didn't want to talk to me because I've been stalking her. Yeah. So she gave me a courtesy hug and said, I'm so sorry I'm late for a meeting, and ran off. And the lady sitting there shrugged her shoulders and handed me a full-time, but a full-time intern badge was different than all the volunteers because it had a security clearance.
Sure.
So I could get in the building. I didn't have to be let in. So I had my badge. I had a couple $100. I ate a 99-cent cheeseburger every day. So that was that's the real story of how I got in. And it's wild, like that story, that serendipitous thing of Sally passing through the lobby, that really happened, right? And so one of my first weeks there, I run out of money after a month, and this lady comes up to me and says, "Are you?" I went and I said, "I'm looking for a job." I knocked on every senior staff's door. They're like, "We have a hiring freeze. We're not hiring." This one lady goes, "Who are you? Where'd you come from?" And I went cold again. I'm like, "Oh, here I am." And she said, and I said, "I'm nobody." She goes, "Who do you know?" I said, "Nobody." And she goes, "I'll be right back." I thought she was going to. I honestly really thought she was going to go get security or whatever.
Have you escorted out?
And so she comes back, and I'd been there about a month, but kind of hiding, right? And she. I was sitting in the intern pit. And by the way, in the intern policy pit where I'd been hiding out, there was President Hoover's granddaughter, President Bush's best friend from Yale's son. It was just all the kids who were literally born on third base, and who all definitely strutted around like they hit triples.
The Nepo babies.
And so she came back and said, she said, I assume you took an accounting class in college? I said, no. She said, I assume you took business classes? I said, not really. And she said, well, congratulations, you have a job in accounting. She goes, and this is what she said to me. She goes, do you know what a cork is? I said, no. She said, I think you're somebody that's going to float to the top. And she said, I want to be a part of your story. So I always tell her, I always talk about her in my story. Nice. She said, I want to be part of your story. And so I try to make sure she's part of my story. And I got a job being a budget manager. My balance never reconciled one single day. Yeah. I was terrible at it.
I feel that.
But I kept networking and meeting people inside the campaign. And a guy named Ken Mellman, who went on to be the White House political director and the chairman of the Republican Party, he said, put a chair outside my office. And I kind of became his assistant. He took me to the Florida recount. And then I became the driver for Secretary James Baker.
At what point did you get paid?
So I was getting, what'd you say?
Well, at what point did you get paid? Like, was it a job?
Yeah, no, when she gave me that job, I was making 30 grand, right? And sleeping on a friend of a friend's 8-year-old son's trundle bed.
Cool.
And anyway, so Ken Mellman started working for him, Secretary James Baker. And when the Florida recount was over, they said, what do you want to do in the White House? And I said, I majored in PR, so communications. Well, there were 80 people in communications on the campaign that all had dibs on those few jobs. So I assumed they were going to stick me in the basement of the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I was home for Christmas. Ari Fleischer, my dad walks in. He goes, I think it's a prank call. It's like, have you ever seen Sweet Home Alabama?
God,
I'm familiar.
Very similar dynamic, meaning like my parents, it was hard for my parents to wrap their brain around. They said, I think it's a prank call. It's a White House operator. And it's Ari Fleischer. And he goes, hey, meet me at the corner of 17th and G at 8 a.m. I didn't know that was the White House. He takes me down across into the West Wing by the Oval Office. And I had this little closet that was Richard Nixon's dog kennel. And, I was probably 30 feet from the Oval Office. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was in tears every day, had no idea. I didn't know the terminology. So I asked Ari years later, out of all the kids who worked in press, why did you hire me? He said, I knew I had to have a guy travel with me I knew I needed an aide to a guy to travel with me. And he said, I probably had 8 people call me about you. He said, so he hired me without even really knowing me.
Incredible.
And so I ended up literally, feet from the Oval Office.
And were you alone? Would you just kind of walk into a room and go, now I have to figure out what I'm doing here? Did you have imposter syndrome?
When I say I was overwhelmed, I didn't know the terminology. I was in charge of the press pool. There's 12 reporters, 13 that are in a rotation every day. It's after JFK, it's like Death Watch. And so they have to go in every meeting, every Oval Office. Anytime there's a meeting or a world leader in the Oval Office, you bring the 12 reporters, the press pool in for 5 minutes. And sometimes they get to ask questions, sometimes they don't. But I kind of was the wrangler of the press pool, right? And I was just messing everything up every day. And Ari was actually a phenomenal boss. He gave me a ton of responsibility. People would go complain to him about me, and he'd say, they would go try to go above my head to Ari. And every single time for 3 years, Ari would go, what's up to read? And I mean, he just kind of threw me in the deep end. And a few reporters, no, they were self-serving, right? But they taught me how to do my job because they've been there for every administration. In fact, one day I was really uptight. I haven't thought about this story in 20 years. One day I was scolding, with all my 25-year-old wisdom, scolding this ABC reporter, and who's a legend, and I didn't know it at the time. And I'm like, you can't go in here. You can't do this. You have to go through me and whatever. I wasn't being mean. I was just stressed. And in the middle of me scolding her, which is just comical, this guy walks up, they hug, she gets choked up and starts crying, and they hug again, and he walks off and she goes, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. She goes, he had your job under Jimmy Carter. And it just kind of hit me, right? He just hit me how, like, these reporters, these White House press corps are institutions.
Yeah.
They're baked into the fabric of the place. We're these like visitors that show up.
Yeah, you're transient.
Yeah. And so it was humbling.
Oh,
it's amazing.
My God.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to golf in a second.
Yeah, we'll get there. There's so much to get through.
It's amazing how much had to go right for that story, because you were there, you remember, but like early on, as I recall, George W. Bush wasn't the front runner. He was like behind McCain at least, and probably a couple others. Like it took a while for him to bubble to the surface, if I'm getting it right, if my history recalls correctly.
Yeah, McCain won New Hampshire. McCain just had a moment, right? He was candid and frank and a war hero. And so, yeah, he had, but George W., going back to the point about name recognition, George W. had, 100% name recognition. Right. And in fairness, people leave out, had been the governor of the second largest state for 6 years, a real chief executive. Yep. And not many people are when they run for president. And most people who run for president don't have the resume to get a job. Kevin Plank and others, Warren Buffett have famously said they couldn't get mid-level jobs in a real company, right? And so President Obama was a good example of that. He turned out President Obama met kind of the Mark Zuckerberg theory, which is he had raw intelligence and raw athleticism.
Sure.
So he turned out to be smart and he was obviously a quick learner. But that's not exactly how you'd interview for the CEO of the country.
Oh, God,
right?
no.
Right. And so George W. had a real qualifications. And he was also a very disciplined. You couldn't get him off message and there was no social media back then. So things could explode all around him. And if we were going to talk about education that week or tax cuts, he was incredibly message disciplined.
But it's so interesting because like to even say that, like, it maybe it wouldn't have been Bush. And that seems so pertinent it's such a key part of a conversation for anyone but you, because it does seem like you were destined to do what you were doing. So it wouldn't have really mattered who was in charge.
Yeah. People for years and still occasionally love to talk about how, he only won by 537 swinging chads because his brother was governor. And I don't even fight those battles anymore because the AP and Reuters did full state recounts, which by the way, there's no constitutional requirement to do that. And he actually won by larger margins in each of those recounts, right? Number two, CBS conveniently called the election before the Panhandle, where all the military voters and all the mega churches, all the Republicans are in the Central Time Zone. CBS forgot and called the election before any of them got off work. And they hadn't counted the military ballots. And so the truth is, when they did the recount, they were only recounting the 4 Democrat counties, Dade County, Broward County. They were only recounting. Well, that's unconstitutional. If you do a recount, it has to be a statewide recount. So there were so many flaws from CBS News all the way to the fact that they were only recounting Miami, right? And yet he still won. So like, I feel like people are really, have really convenient selective hindsight revisionism about that whole thing.
So how did your White House... You
can edit that out. I don't know why I would do that.
No, please.
It's interesting. How did your White House run come to an end? And what did you do? Or were you panicked? As in like, what am I going to do?
I wasn't wise enough to be panicked. I did have this intuitive feeling that I had done everything people spend their whole lives in DC. Sure. People spend their whole careers in DC to get to, like, most people at the White House see the president at the Christmas party. I had been playing golf, running with him, going to Camp David, playing cards with him in the Air Force One. I had all these incredible experiences and been around President Putin and all this. So I had this incredible 5 years. I was when all my friends my age were going to get Starbucks for their bosses, I had a limo waiting out in front of me in the campaign headquarters that said Mr. Dickens on the window. I'd go do national TV interviews, and I'd been to Baghdad and slept on Saddam Hussein's palace roof for a few months and helped set up the Green Zone.
For a few months?
I had literally...
They didn't give you a bed?
No, there were no beds. We bombed every palace except one, and that's where we set up right there. And so all that to say, I had lived like 3 lives and had 3 careers of DC experience. And all I knew, and in fact, President Bush asked me one day at his ranch, he said, "I hear you're leaving." And I said, I was so nervous. I said, "Well, I want to own my own company." I said, "I want to make $1 million." I didn't know out here that's like a monthly burn rate.
It's like Austin Powers, $1 million.
Really. And so I said, "I want to own my own business. I want to make $1 million. I want to have a family." I said, "I don't feel like I'm getting in closer to those 3 goals here." And I said, "I also don't want any of my boss's jobs." Like, I had all the perks of the White House press secretary without needing a lawyer for subpoenas. Right. And so I kind of had gotten all the good out of DC, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I wanted to be in LA, and I had met my now wife at a party at the Emmys, and she lived in LA, and I joke all the time, if she just said Minnesota, I don't know what would happen, but so I drove I left DC the morning after. I had to go on a G4 with 5 other people in the middle of the night in secret because they thought there was going to be a recount in Ohio. We landed, and Mike Allen, who's now the founder of Axios, Mike Allen texted me and said, "John Kerry's conceding in an hour." We get right back on the plane, go back.
Oh my God.
I didn't even go to the campaign party. I got in a U-Haul. Somebody paid me to drive their furniture across country. And I was like, I'm done with politics. And halfway across the country, Campbell Brown from NBC at the time, she now works for I think she's still at Facebook, but Campbell Brown was like the senior NBC correspondent. She said, "Hey, Mike Murphy," who was like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Karl Rove, "Mike Murphy needs someone to be the on-call spokesman for his ballot initiative campaign." And I said, "Nope." I said, "I am done with politics." And she called me back and she goes, "I think," she goes like, "they'll pay you $40,000 a month." And I was like, Done.
Can do.
I literally diverted my U-Haul to Sacramento because I had $0 in a maxed out credit card, and I went to Sacramento for 5 or 6 months and saved up some money and then moved to LA.
Smart. Yeah, right. Indeed.
I hope when you retell your story, and we're kind of only halfway there, that you are at least mulling around who you'd like to play you in This Gets Optioned.
That's funny. A chairman of a major movie studio asked me about, I don't know, it's probably been 7 or 8 years, if he could make a movie about me. And I said, absolutely not. That's like the worst thing that could happen to you in the middle of your career, right? That's like, it hasn't culminated in anything.
That's right. It's a look
the
back.
Last thing I want. Yeah. And yeah.
So you went into something that, we've seen on TV and Kerry Washington and all this stuff, but like crisis management for very, 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 very powerful people.
Yeah. I often joke I was born without a skill, right? I didn't have a talent. I just knew a bunch of reporters, and I had a lot of experience talking to media. And so I also had tried to get some jobs out here, and I was kind of too young for the jobs my resume qualified me for.
Sure.
In fact, Xenia Muka, one of Bob Iger's top executives at Disney, she told me point blank one day, we had lunch with Bob Iger, and I was trying to get this senior VP job at Disney, and she goes, "You are eminently qualified for this role." She was like, "I just can't tell 7 or 8 VPs that are twice your age that they have to report to."
That we hired you.
She was actually super honest about it. And so I walked away deflated and realized I need to start my own business. So I started Outside Eyes, and I was
so you got a fake ID.
Right.
And so you were 33.
I actually pitched 2 different clients who were kind of in the middle of scandal crisis. And they said, "How much do you charge?" I had no idea. I didn't have a bank account. I didn't have an office. And so I made up $25,000 a month for 12 months. And and he goes, "Whoa." And I said, well, I called him back the next day and said, if you pay up front, I'll give you a 50% discount. And he goes, okay.
Done.
And 2 different people gave me $150,000 checks. I was off to the races.
Can you say who they were?
Well, one was the gentleman, he just passed away recently. He was one of the Wrigley heirs. He owned Catalina Island.
Yep.
And then the other was Dave Dunn, who they made the movie Jerry Maguire about. And of course, Lee Steinberg convinced the world they made it about him. But Dave Dunn is actually who walked out and took the athletes with him, and he was the Jerry Maguire. Okay. And he and Lee Steinberg were in a big fight, and I helped Dave with all of his media, and that was my first client.
And you're feeling your way in the dark, even though you have a certain amount of experience. You've been watching all the right people, I guess. You don't have this is not where you come
from. The thing
from.
I had going for me is I was a 28-year-old boy who didn't know what I didn't know, right?
Yeah.
I was supremely confident.
Dunning-Kruger boy.
Yeah, I was way more, I always say that I'm still not qualified for the job I had at 26, but I was way more confident then, right?
Was this like around the time of the housing crisis? Like where it was what was the financial
that wasn't still end of 08. That was like 09.
This is before that.
Yeah.
So so there's tons of people these days making tons of mistakes online, getting fired right and left. And I know we all know, like, the more you keep your mouth shut, the better. But might you be able to look back in your history as a crisis management professional and maybe give us plebes some advice on how to get ourselves out of some sticky situations?
What happens when you gets popped for a major scandal? What should you do?
But everybody's always getting themselves in trouble.
I really did develop my own philosophies over time, because I actually sold that business to my partner after a few years, but 15 years later, I was still probably not one a week anymore, but one a month. I'll get called. I was told should only talk to you. And I always say, no, I'll have people to refer you to. They go, no. They told me you would say that. I want to talk to you. And so I still get, I'd say 10 a year that people, and I pass them all off. But I really did develop my own original, not IP, but my kind of original thoughts about crisis, where the first thing I noticed is that people would think they had a perception problem when they had a reality problem.
Ooh.
Right. And so that's my number one thing is, do you have a perception problem, reality problem? And my threshold for that is if you pull the curtain back, if the public knew everything behind the curtain, and it would actually, if that would be a positive,
break even,
then that means you have a perception problem.
Sure.
If they pull the curtain back and what's behind the curtain is worse, that means you have a reality problem.
Yes.
Right.
Interesting.
Tiger Woods with one woman would have been a perception problem. Tiger Woods with 67 women is a reality problem. Right. And so
they're not seeing the real you.
And then the other thing is, I often found people thought they had a PR problem when they had a legal problem. Like you don't need a PR person. You need a lawyer. You could go to jail. Right.
Oh my
and so
God.
I at a young age, I did see that pattern very quickly, that when people would come in and want to hire me, I would have to say, I'm not a lawyer. You could win the PR battle and your stock price could still lose billions of dollars and you could go to jail. This is a criminal issue. Or I would tell people all the time, I'm a PR person, not a magician. They would actually, you could tell while they were talking that they had been an asshole their whole life. And then they wanted me to like do a profile on them in the Wall Street Journal. I'm like, yeah, that's not your problem.
Not gonna help.
You're a dick. Right. And so I actually really saw early on that I had these filters I would apply, and I would say it to them. Do you have a legal problem, PR problem? Do you have a perception problem or a reality problem? And so I kind of walk people through that exercise. And I think to this day, that's still my best advice.
I would think that the people that are coming to you for help, it would be 80% a reality problem versus a perception problem.
No, not necessarily, because there was a few, two actually national funeral home chains that what do you call it? Cremated the wrong body.
Oh boy.
Like, it wasn't criminal.
Oof,
it was bad process.
It's a whoopsie.
It was bad process. And so one of the things I learned from Mike McCurry, Bill Clinton's press secretary, is that you should always, no matter how quick or simple the action you take, you need to take some action so you can talk about it in past tense. Mike McCurry was a master at anything you brought up. He would say, yeah, I already addressed that this morning in the gaggle, and we already took steps to take that. It was like it was old, even if it was 9:30 that morning, right? And when the story broke, Mike McCurry talked about everything like it was old news. It was past tense. But you have to take some action, some substantial action, like put a new policy in place, put up signs saying, hey, check the body twice. You need to do something. You need to do something, right? And then say, yeah, we already took steps to make sure this isn't happening more. And so I developed all these rules for crisis just from dealing with them.
And I don't remember who it was in which administration in the White House. It said something like, tell the truth and tell it first. And I don't know if that played into what you had to do.
Yeah, such a romantic era when we thought there was truth, right? Now there's, I don't know that anyone would ever agree on what truth is.
Yeah.
And so, that's a different, I was in a different era. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think I know every generation says that, but I truly think with the internet and social media and the polarization, even that's an overused word, I do
appropriately though.
I do think people are mainlining, self confirmation bias.
Sure.
And so people are mainlining opinions, and a lot of people aren't even aware that the algorithms are designed to just feed you your own Kool-Aid,
your own confirmation bias.
Everyone drinks their own Kool-Aid and then thinks that they have some version of reality, and it's like so disconnected from reality.
So I would think that right now, from what you're saying, it would be the hardest time to be in crisis management because everybody's creating a crisis and you can't agree on, what's up and what's down. Yeah,
I actually think, to quote Michelle Obama, like the best crisis management now is just be good, right? Be good, be better, do better. Don't do stupid shit, as Obama says. I actually think that's the best crisis management.
This is the golden, boring diet and exercise.
Yeah.
Just be good.
If I known that, I wouldn't be coming to you.
Right. Yeah, I actually just also think that, the old expression that bad news travels around the world before good news can get its pants on or whatever. Yeah. I actually think with social media, that's true, right? So you can't control the message anymore. No. You can't control perception anymore. And now there's like deep fakes and AI and whatever, like you almost have to just block out the noise. Yeah. Right.
I was thinking back to your earlier thing, your point about who these guys are, the president, like you have to be a certain, it's a scary word, but like a certain level of sociopath to not let how other people think of you.
So I've said for 20 years that to run for president, you have to truly have like lived your life and decided that you had like a calling. Like it's either a true sense of duty. And I actually think George W. Bush felt that way. It's either a true sense of duty or it's two types of people who feel that calling and it's sincere. I think Mitt Romney was that way. John McCain was that way. George W. Bush was that way. It's either those people who like, I live my life. I don't need the money. I don't need anything. I want to actually serve. Whether you agree with them or not, there are people who do feel that way. And then the other type of person that runs for president, people who've been winking in the mirror since they were 8th grade. Right.
Yep.
John Kerry used to take his soldiers back into the dangerous battlefield to reenact things for video so that he could run for office. Like,
how fun.
It's people who it's people who literally have been waving in the mirror since they were 14 are people who want to serve. And I don't think there's a lot of in the middle.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a terrible career. It's a terrible job, right?
Yeah, who'd want that life on anyone?
Right. So let's move up a little bit to you've already lived 1,000 lives. And
on that note, can I interrupt you? I'm so sorry.
oh, is there more?
No, I had one thought.
Please.
This is a brand new thought that
please.
that I really only realized in the last year.
Oh, we're debuting a new thought here on the show.
No, but actually, a friend of mine, Cotty Johnson, a few people helped me come to this conclusion. People always talk about people don't go into run for office because it's terrible for your family and your reputation, whatever. I actually don't think that's the problem. I had a few friends that helped me realize that forever you went into government. The best and the brightest went into government. In 1700, 1800, and 1900, if you took the 1,000 smartest people in America by any metric, 90% were in government. That went to zero, basically, because if you wanted to accomplish something at scale, if you wanted to do something big or solve a big problem at scale, AIDS in Africa, cancer, going to the moon, whatever, you had to go to government. Cheap debt, private equity comes along, and scale is more efficient and optimal in the private sector and actually takes longer in the public sector. You don't need to go into government. NASA's hitching rides with Elon to space.
Right.
So I actually think that the best and the brightest stop aspiring to go into government because you don't need to go into government to accomplish big things anymore.
Because that's not where the power is.
Yeah.
It'll slow you down in a lot of cases.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like you said, we're seeing that now with Space Race, 2.0.
Yeah.
So let's talk sports. Were you like an athlete in high school? Was that your thing? Where did this come from?
I was mediocre at everything. I thought I was really good.
Perfect politician.
Yes.
One time a Met scout was at one of my games and I truly thought like, this is my moment.
Sure.
And he told my dad, he was like, yeah, I mean, with a little development here and there, whatever, like he might be like a 25th or 30th rounder. And I was like, there's a 30th round. It was very like eye opening. I was like, oh, wow. And so, I did play sports, baseball, football, loved it. I mean, that's all. I mean, that was a religion in the South.
Sure.
We had thousands of people at our games. It was like Friday Night Lights environment. And, but no, I did not have the tools.
But you were the big fish in this really small pond, I imagine.
At first, yeah.
Yeah.
Eventually everyone caught up with me. Yeah.
Did you beeline it to LA from Sacramento, more or less?
Oh yeah. Cause my wife was there and I went every weekend and loved it. And it still is everything I thought it would be. I love it. I have a very romantic view of LA. I do.
That's so refreshing because so many people are jaded. I've been here for over 20 years. Brian's essentially from here. And, everyone's just tired and it's just, the bloom is off the rose, but it's nice to hear that.
I probably have, I don't know. This is a made up number because 98.2% of numbers are made up, but I think 50-ish friends who left to go to Austin or Nashville or whatever, and they all came back. Almost all of them. Right. And so, I've always said when people talk about all the things they hated about LA, I would say you should leave.
Please, more for the rest of us. Little boomerangs came back. So were you always into golf? Why golf?
I never got to play golf, right? Like I think our coaches thought that would mess up my baseball swing, right? And it was also a rich kid sport, right? It was expensive. And so by the time Marucci sold, I was in the desert with my family and some friends. And I said to my friend, what if I could go play golf or travel to Augusta and say, babe, I'm going to work. And he laughed. And when I heard myself say that, he laughed and I didn't. And I did what any entrepreneur does, was I played on GoDaddy for an hour and saw that the name LA Golf and LA Golf Partners were $10. And I was like, I'm going to find something to do in golf. And so I really did. I went and I tried to buy Foresight simulators and that deal fell through. But
it was reverse engineered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You weren't golfing.
I literally
since you were
started
in
with the name LA Golf. That's what I started with.
Oh my God. Do you consider yourself a good golfer at this point?
So I didn't. I always say I'm a terrible golfer, but then I read the other day that like 98% of golfers never break 90. Like if you keep score legitimately,
right.
I think it's like 98% of golfers never break 90 or 95% or something like that. Or something like that, and 90%. And then like another only 1% break 80. And so I've broken 80 a few times this year. So I guess I'm in the 1% now.
You ain't bad.
But I only play with really good golfers. And so
it's always going to keep you humble.
In the ecosystem I'm in, I'm the worst golfer in every group.
How does all this happen? I'm pointing to this office.
Gorgeous
here, this
office
complex.
building.
How does this start?
Yeah, I've been very blessed because I have really good partners and investors. And Alon Abadi, one of my investors, he owned this building at the time, and he said, you can do whatever you want with it. I said, whatever I want. And I kind of had this.
Well, I've got this website.
I kind of had this Well, no, this is only a couple years ago, but I had this concept. Everything you see, the bar, the putting lanes, the rooftop, everything here, I kind of had in my mind. Like, I hate offices. In fact, I hosted every meeting at Grand Havana Room Cigar Club, Stallone and Schwarzenegger's old cigar club. Right?
Yeah.
And I'd host all my meetings there. And I was like, I hated office with a passion. It just gave me the hives. I was like, if I ever have an office, I want it to be somewhere that meets 2 criteria. I want to look forward to going there, and I want to be able to entertain. And so when he said, do whatever you want with this, he really did allow me to do whatever I wanted. And it's turned out to be, it's actually gotten utilized 10 times more than I expected. I mean, we host events and parties and meetings, and it's been really great.
That's awesome.
So let's talk about the golf club itself and the golf shaft. I know, I've beaten my 8-year-old stepson a couple times at putt-putt, but I don't expect you to, understand what kind of a scratch golfer I am. Sure. But what is the difference between the clubs that we all know and the clubs that we're all used to seeing, and how have you disrupted this industry? I mean, we're really lay people when it comes to this.
I'm going to be very straight to the point. Golf is not just a lazy, complacent. It's not just a complacent industry full of dinosaur incumbents. I would say it's bordering on consumer fraud.
Oh my!
Because what I mean by that is, TaylorMade will sell you a $600 driver with a $2 stock shaft in it. They don't tell you that. If you want a real shaft, you have to pay another $400, and then you have to go get fitted, and then you have to get a grip. And then you're $1,000 in, then they go, oh, the new model's out by the time you get set up, right?
God.
And so I always say, if you bought a Ferrari for $400,000 and it sounded funny, and you took it back to the dealership and they said, oh, well, it has a Honda Civic engine. If you want a full Ferrari, you need to pay another $400,000. You'd sue them.
Yeah,
golf has normalized that behavior. It's a bait and switch industry. So Scotty Cameron will sell you a $2,500 Tour Circle T putter with a $3 steel shaft in it, right? If you want to keep your putter head stable, you have to go buy a $400 putter shaft, right? So what makes us different is we started with the shaft. We started with the engines, right? The shaft is the engine and transmission of the golf club. We started there. Now we did shafts the first year, putters the second year, ball. We have, and one thing I did get from the White House is to have message discipline, right? Never get message fatigue. And we have one message to the industry every year. Our message last year was we have balls, right? And that kind of became a war cry, but also just a factual announcement. Yeah. Because people thought of us as a shaft company. We started out as a component part company, and everybody's like, no one took us seriously. Then we had a putter. Then the third year we have balls. Well, now Bryson, I'm going to tie politics and business together for a second. Bryson basically announced yesterday in this press conference, we have a secret driver coming out, but he said it out loud. And so we're riding. Bryson DeChambeau just won the U.S. Open. We're living in his world right now, right? Yep. And I'm grateful to have him as a partner. We wouldn't be here without him. And so just like Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton's staff used to have a heart attack when he would say things, he would say things in press conferences, and his head of policy would say, we don't have that policy. Yeah. And his chief of staff would say, we do now.
You got to figure it out.
They called it making policy from the podium.
Right.
And so Bryson has announced our 3D printed irons. It was supposed to be a big surprise for the spring. He announced our driver yesterday in the media, but guess what? The big companies can't keep up with us. They can't move that fast. They have a 3-year product cycle. So we're coming out with 3D printed iron heads where we can print an iron to match your swing, an iron face. We're coming out with the first driver ever where the face matches your swing speed and the shaft matches the head. And I know this is getting really technical, but if you say what makes us different?
Yeah, please.
Every draft driver on the market. So TaylorMade and Callaway spend $100 million a year on R&D, and they all make the same driver. Oh. It's a one size fits all face, and everything else is marketing BS, right? So in fact, if you're not in one little window of swing speed, I think only like 5% of golfers benefit from their technology. So it's a one size fits all driver, right? And so more bait and switch, right? They market you something, it doesn't really fit your swing. Then they have a head, so they tell you where the sweet spot is. The design of the face tells you what the sweet spot is, but the center of gravity is actually not in the center of the driver face because they don't design their driver head with the shaft in it. So all the big companies just make the club heads. So when you buy a driver and you find another shaft to go in that head, right? It's a shaft that wasn't made for the head, and the driver face isn't made for your swing. So we're coming out, Bryson came up with the idea, and my engineer, Jeff Meyer, we're coming out with the first driver ever where the shaft is made for the head and the face is made for your swing. And we patented that. So it's a big innovation. We're really excited about it. And really everything we've done for 4 years has led up to this driver.
Was it hard? How hard was it, if at all, to get golfers on board with new technology? Because like you said, this is an industry that's baked into tradition, doing things the old way? Was it hard to get people on board?
I wouldn't even say it in past tense like we've done it. I think it's hard now.
Yeah, sure.
I joke all the time that
has it been hard?
I joke it's extremely hard, and I'm going to tell you this is one of my favorite rants. I'm basically stringing together what my assistant calls read rants. The golf industry, I say this all the time, it's about 10 to 15 times larger than baseball. Okay. The difference is adoption is 10 to 15 times harder. In baseball, if you say, hey, this wood is 7% harder than Louisville Sluggers, the ball will go 15 or 20 feet further. They go, okay, I'll try it. That's it, right? You got a bunch of kind of redneck chewing tobacco athletes who want a better bat, right? Yep. That's the tool of their trade. In golf, even though the shaft is how they make their living, golf is full. I made up a term called ERGs, emphatic rich guys. Golf is full of emphatic rich guys. They will say I would say the majority of golfers will, if you try to talk to them about, I can quote robot, slow motion camera, robot data, independent studies, and they'll quote their club pro.
Oh, sure.
Right. So what happens is emphatic rich guys will repeat something emphatically that is Googleably, demonstrably, scientifically false. I think only mega churches and politics have more demonstrably false statements, right? That you could just prove is not true. And so in golf, adoption's really hard. And the friction to get fitted for clubs, you have to go get fitted and change out your club heads. And so there's a lot of friction with the process of getting new clubs. You don't just go buy new golf clubs. Well, they'd like you to, right?
Sure.
But if you really want to optimize your swing, you have to go get fitted and get new shafts.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of friction. And then there's a lot of emphatic rich guys repeating outdated misinformation.
It's baseball before Moneyball. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like,
Right.
So it's not about on-base percentage. Right. I don't care.
And you know what's crazy? This is why shafts are so important. I believe the majority of golf instruction in the last 50 years was from shitty shafts. Like
overcompensating.
No, because every pro is teaching you things like slow your swing down, have good tempo. That's because the shaft sucked.
Oh.
So everybody has these Freddie Couples smooth swings because the shafts used to be like a fishing pole. Yeah. Well, Bryson, we came up with a shaft that is stiff in the midsection so you can swing more athletically and make like an athletic move.
Yeah.
And the club face corrects on impact so you can swing harder and be more athletic. Like Jack Nicklaus, Tiger Woods, and Bryson DeChambeau, 3 different generations. All 3 said you should swing as hard as you can without falling over. Well, no one does that. No. And no club pro teaches that because the shafts suck. So the truth is, I think golf instruction has been manipulated by bad equipment.
Interesting.
That's so interesting and it's funny that you said how hard is it to get people on board for this, and even more interesting that you said very, because my first thought was, this is such a revolutionary idea and it's so helpful. When are they going to consider it cheating? That these people are getting an edge that everybody else wants. Yeah,
well, it's interesting. I said this when the USGA said they were going to roll back golf balls. I put out a statement that said that just like most regulators in government and in business, regulators always regulate the wrong thing. You got a bunch of old guys who don't have any real world experience, always regulating the wrong thing, right? And so the ball's not the problem. There's tons of data showing the ball's not the problem, but they decided to regulate the ball. Yep. That only hurts the big companies though. Titleist has like a 3-year product cycle. We designed our ball IP and developed it and launched it in all less than a year, right? So we move fast, and was it Uber or I forget which company? It was move fast and break shit. Like we move fast, and that's what we try to be pirates and special forces, and we try to be a speedboat versus an aircraft carrier.
Smart.
Yeah.
Well, and you are you're smarter and lighter. You don't have this big overhead.
More nimble for sure. I don't know if we're smarter, but more nimble.
And you mentioned just in a quick passing, like baseball bats, which you also have some experience with. Yes.
Yep. So my co-founder Kurt Ainsworth is still the CEO of Marucci. We met through my little brother, Reagan was working with the governor of Louisiana, and Kurt had this Amish wood that was harder than Louisville Sluggers. He didn't have a lot of business background, but he was a former major league pitcher. And we met. I kind of cold called him and basically said, I'll raise the money, but I want to be the CEO. And he said, deal. And so I always joke, Marucci, Kurt is really the father of Marucci. Like he was the baseball guy. He already had the product, right? I always say there's 7 elements of business, right? There's mindset, product, people, business model, capital structure, story, market dynamic, right? And people always try to talk about the product or the people, but there's really a lot of stars that have to align, right? Kurt had the product. He had the relationships in Major League Baseball locker rooms. But Louisville Slugger kind of had a monopoly on the industry.
All we've ever heard
So
of.
I came along. We jokingly say like he's Mark Zuckerberg and I was Sean Parker. I came along. I raised all the money. I created the brand story. Got us in Dick's Sporting Goods. Built a supply chain in China for our non-wood products. And so I built the business, raised the capital, and built the brand. And Kurt was the baseball guy. And then he eventually became the CEO. And Marucci. I was doing the math the other day. I believe from Major League to Little League and everything in between, 1 out of every 2 at-bats in the world, at-bats, is a Marucci.
Wow.
So all 40 other companies are the other half. Yeah.
Damn.
That's incredible. And so I would imagine that had a lot to do with your inspiration for the shaft. Or just thinking, this is something that, hasn't changed since the dinosaurs were around. How do we make it better?
Yeah. Listen, it's easy in hindsight to be like, I recognize this opportunity and said, I'm going to disrupt the golf industry and start with a shaft. But as most things in life, it's more messy and nuanced. Bryson DeChambeau was about to go on a speed journey, he called it. And boy, we had no idea what he meant by that. But he basically said, I'm going to gain weight. I'm going to increase my ball speed. And Bryson's a true contrarian because everyone said, like when he won his first US Open, you can't overpower Winged Foot. Well, he said, I'll never forget this quote because I think this one quote from a 26-year-old boy changed the whole golf industry. He said, well, I'd rather have a wedge in my hand from the rough than a 7-iron from the fairway. When every reporter laughed, they like, they all rolled their eyes. It changed golf. They all laughed at him. And then Rory and everybody else went and started working out. Right.
Wow.
And so this time, they said, well, you can't win the US Open this year at Pinehurst number 2. You can't win Pinehurst unless you hit fairways. He didn't hit a fairway the last week. And then they also said, well, he can't control his wedge distances with long shafts. Well, those long shafts are the only reason he was able to hit out of that fescue wiregrass, and his longer shafts, single length shafts, are the only reason he made that 55-yard bunker shot at the very end. So he has truly defied all the experts every step of the way. He's been an amazing partner, and I learned so much from him.
Yeah, that's a great. The marriage made in heaven, honestly, those two. I feel like we could talk about this forever, but we had you for an hour, so we should. Let's get back to golf.
I just want to hang out
the world,
in
man.
office and talk about the classified papers.
Yeah.
You know what? So on the classified
recording,
I have two comments on classified documents just for fun. We'll end on this. So this is a pet peeve topic of mine, and this has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It has to do with all the stupid things reporters say. So when someone mentions the phrase classified documents, you should always ask yourself 2 questions: classified by whom and from whom?
Mm.
Bill Clinton took classified documents. Obama took classified documents. Everyone, you know why? Because they're like God in the sense that a president can declassify something verbally in the bathroom by themselves.
Wow.
They can say declassified. A president can verbally declassify documents. And by the way, they're classified from you, not him.
Right.
So when people sound so stupid talking about the classified document.
Think about it that way.
Right. And then the second thing is when people talk about classified information and everyone loves to act like they know something, right? Well, I saw a Pentagon general say he saw a UFO, blah, 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 whatever the topic, right? Everyone quotes, my friend worked at the CIA. I'm like, oh, really? Yeah. Anytime someone talks about anything that their friend or colleague or somebody they know knows, you should always remember my favorite DC quote, which is that everyone who's talking doesn't know, and everyone who knows doesn't talk.
Well put.
Very well
That's my favorite.
On that note,
oh my,
yeah,
we should
thank
shut
you for
up
hosting
immediately.
our first ever remote live show.
Thank you so much for
fun.
welcoming us into your space.
This was fun.
Telling us the best story.
Let's do it again tomorrow.
Okay.
LA Golf is the company. You can read your profile in this month's issue of LA Magazine, The Innovator. I'll just look for that. And thank you so much, Reed.
Thanks for having me.
Is there a way for people to follow you online? And are you a social media guy yourself, or have you learned your lesson by being a crisis manager?
I love to quote Michael Lewis on this topic, the author.
Please.
LA Golf, at LA Golf on Instagram.
That is where we shall find you. Thank you so much for letting us do this. And we will talk to you guys soon.
Thank you for listening to The Brian and Gina Show. To get in touch with the hosts or buy their books, hit them up at @BaldBrian and @GinaGrad on Twitter and Instagram, or by email at podcasts@lamag.com. To get connected with LA Magazine, hit them up at @LAMag on Twitter and Instagram. Talk soon.